Before we begin, we need to have done two things. The first thing we needed to have done was to download and install the newest version of the L Printer Service Tool. This is available on the eSupport webpage. The next thing we would have needed to have done is to have downloaded the newest firmware. The firmware is not posted on eSupport. It's actually posted on the consumer website, which is www.usa.canon.com. Let's begin with the demonstration. For this video, I'm going to be flashing an iPF 755 printer. Right now, I have already downloaded the firmware into a folder called firmware. And here's the executable file. Now I'm going to need to double click on this and run it, and what this is going to do is going to unzip the contents of the file and create a new folder in this folder with the firmware in it. If you open this folder up, you're going to notice there's a lot of files in here. These files are for using the end user firmware update tool. Since we're using the L Printer tool, we're not going to need to run the setup or be concerned with any files other than the file that's inside of the data folder, which ends in the extension .jdl. This is the actual printer firmware. So now that I've already unzipped this, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open the L Printer Service Tool. Once this opens up, I need to make sure that I'm going to be able to see the printer, so I need to go to View and specify search range and set whether I'm going to be looking for the printer over the network or via a local connection. Since I'm doing this over the network, I'm selecting network, and I entered in the IP address of the printer here already. You don't need to do this. If you just leave it blank, it's going to do a broadcast search, but to make this a little faster, I entered in the IP address here. So now I'm going to click OK, and then click the refresh button for the L Printer tool to begin its search. Once the L Printer tool finds the printer, it'll be listed in the middle of the window. So here we can see it found our iPF 755 on the network. What I'm going to need to do next is click the firmware button, click where it says specify firmware, and once I do this, it's going to open up a window, and I have two options: to specify the firmware folder or specify the firmware file. What I'm going to do is select specify firmware file, and then click this little box that has three little dots on it. Once I do that, it's going to open up the open window, and I'm going to point this to where I unzip the files to. So I'm going to go to my desktop, go to the firmware folder. Here's the folder that was created during the unzipping, and I'm going to open another subfolder. Then here's the data folder. I'm going to open that, and here's our .jdl file. So I'm going to select this and click open, then click OK on this dialog box, and it shows me right here what firmware is selected. Next, I'm going to highlight the printer in the middle of the window and click on Transfer Firmware. You'll get this dialog box that it's going to start the firmware transfer, and then hit OK, and the firmware transfer mode begins. And now it says it's completed, and if we look on the display of the printer, it's going to show that it was receiving the firmware. It'll show then when it's installing the firmware, and then it will actually power off on its own. So this concludes the video on how to install the firmware on an imagePROGRAF IPF machine. I hope this video has been